All right, nice to see everyone. We're going to continue. Although to continue today, I have to go back to what we did yesterday. The sugya began at the bottom of Dalet Amud, the bottom of 4b, and it's going to continue into 5a. So we're going to go back. I'm going to run through this. I apologize for the speed in advance, but otherwise I'm going to have a hard time catching up with the stuff on 5b. Those who were there yesterday will be able to hopefully follow very easily. Now, I'll tell you where we're going to start. Okay? We're going to start, just for the sake of being quicker, we're going to start about 7 lines up from the bottom of 4b on page 16 here in the Mesifta Talmud. When it says Amar Abaye, the question is very simple. The Gemara says that it's evident from all the opinions that rabbinically the rabbis added certain measures as to when you're supposed to stop eating chametz and then burning chametz, but it seems from all the opinions that the biblical min ha-Torah guidelines, the min ha-Torah prohibition begins at chatzot hayam, midday. The question was, what is the source for this? So we're going to go back to one place where this begins. We're going to go for Amar Abaye. Tere kerakit. It says Abaye. I'll tell you the source. There's 2 pasukim that seem to contradict. One pasuk says ketiv shivat yamim seor 7 days, seor, which is another synonymous word for chametz. Chametz or seor or yeast should not be found in your homes. That connotes, simplistically, that 7 full days you shouldn't have chametz.
Did you say it's synonymous with chametz?
Not exactly, but in this context.
Okay.
Right? Okay? In this context. So, 7 days connotes 7 full days you shouldn't have chametz in your homes. Okay, another pasuk says, Uchtiv, in the same parasha, another verse says, Ach, however, Bayom HaRishon, Tashpitu Seor, Mibatechem. Thus, however, on the first day, destroy the Seor from your homes, which seems to insinuate, seems to say pretty clearly, on the first day you destroy the chametz. That means part of the first day, you're allowed to have it. Whether you burn the chametz at 7 in the morning or at noon or whatever it is, at the end of the day, part of the day, you're allowed to have it because on that day you're destroying it. HaKetzat. So how do you reconcile these 2 verses? Lerabot 14 leviut b'leviur. Must be the Torah is telling you that Bayom HaRishon that I'm talking about, the Torah says, on the first day of destroy chametz does not mean the first day of Chag, because on the first day of Chag already is one of the 7 days you cannot be owning or having chametz at all. Must be, the Torah means to tell you that on the day prior to the first day of Chag, in Erev Pesach, the obligation to destroy chametz comes in. Okay? The Gemara says, why is that so? Ve'ema, I'll tell you differently. I'll tell you different, simpler explanation, simpler reconcile psukim. Ve'ema, I'll tell you. Lerabot, lele hamishas leviur. Maybe the Torah is telling you something a little more simpler. You might have thought that the prohibition of owning chametz only applies during the day, because it says yamim. Maybe at night, you would have thought mistakenly you're allowed to own chametz. That's what the Torah comes to say, to add a pasuk, to emphasize that even the nights are a problem. I might have thought to myself mistakenly, yamim ketiv, it says yamim, and I might have said yamim en, days, yes, days are prohibited, lelot la, but the nights are not prohibited, kamash balan, afilu lelot. So the Torah is coming to tell you, by giving you 2 verses that includes even the nights. And therefore you have no proof at this point to try to tell me chametz needs to be burnt at Pesach. That proof is gone. The Gemara says no. Hahu la itzarech aleh. You don't need a pasuk to tell you that the 7 days of Pesach, including the nights, are entirely forbidden in chametz. You don't need a special pasuk for that. You know why? Because it tekash hashbatat seor la'achilat chametz. Because you have a very interesting triangle here. In 2 places, or 3 places, the Torah, by putting 2 concepts, 2 halachot, 2 ideas, 2 actions in the same pasuk, the Torah creates a hekesh. A hekesh, which translates loosely into a connection, means by virtue of the Torah putting 1 or 2 or more concepts together in the same pasuk, the Torah is connecting those concepts, those halachot, those ideas, those actions to be in the same category. Now here, what do you see over here? Itekash hashbatat seor la'achilat chametz. The prohibition, well, actually the obligation to destroy the chametz, right? And the prohibition of eating chametz are combined together in the same pasuk. They are hukash. They are juxtaposed. They are connected together, which means they have the same parameters, the same guidelines. Ba'achilat chametz, la'achilat matzah. And then in a different pasuk, the prohibition of eating chametz is juxtaposed and connected, thereby equated in a certain sense to the obligation to eat matzah. Now, hashbatat se'or la'achilat chametz. How do we know that the obligation to destroy chametz and the prohibition of eating chametz are connected together? The pasuk says in the same pasuk, in the same verse, Shiv'at yamim se'or lo yimatzeh bevatechem. The Torah says for 7 days se'or should not be found in your homes. Ki kol ochel machametz nichleta, because whoever eats chametz gets destroyed, gets cut. So you see in one verse the obligation to destroy chametz and the prohibition of eating chametz are juxtaposed and thereby equated. B'achilat chametz la'achilat matzah. And in a different verse, now you have the second element, right? The prohibition of eating chametz is juxtaposed and equated, or given the same parameters as the obligation to eat matzah. How do we know? Dichtet pasuk says, "Kol machametzet lo tochelu." In the same parasha in Shemot, the Torah says, "And any chametz do not eat. Bechol moshvotechem tochlu matzot." In all your dwellings, eat matzot. So what happens? Uchti b'matzah, and matzah it says outright in the Torah, ba'erev tochlu matzot. The obligation to eat matzah comes in when? Ba'erev, in the evening. So now take the triangle backwards. If matzah applies to the evening, and matzah was juxtaposed and equated with the prohibition of eating chametz, that means chametz also applies in the evening. And the obligation of hashbata also goes to the evening. So all of these different concepts, whether an obligation or prohibition of Pesach, seems to be hukash, seems to be juxtaposed and equated together for certain parameters, and therefore it's obvious. You don't need a pasuk to tell you that the obligation of eating or owning chametz applies at night. It's obvious. You learn from the Sekesh. Okay? So therefore what? Therefore, going back to square one, therefore must be trying to go back to maintain what we said earlier, which is that the extra pasuk, ach, by Marshon Tashbitu, the pasuk is going to tell you not on Pesach itself, rather on Erev Pesach, on the day prior to Pesach, Passover Eve, you have to destroy chametz, and thereby the prohibition of eating chametz also kicks in at midday. Okay. Ve'ema lerabot lele yudal lebiur. Another attempt to dismiss that learning. No, maybe, you know what? Maybe, again, you have two psukim that contradict, but maybe there's a reason for it. You know why? How do you know that you have an obligation also to destroy the chametz if you own chametz by mistake or whatever it is? Lel Yudalet. Maybe you need to say that you have to destroy the chametz even the night of the 14th, the night before the 14th, which is when we do the rabbinical checking, but not the biur, not the destruction. That's another Pesach. Maybe that's what it's coming to do. Maybe it's coming to take you even one half a day further, and the prohibition should kick in the night before already. The Gemara says, Bayom Ketiv. You can't say that because it says, when do you destroy the chametz? Bayom, in the day. Has to be at a Pesach. Ve'ema. If it says the obligation to destroy chametz kicks in the day, okay. I'll tell you, mit safra, the day begins in the morning, so obligation should kick in the morning already. The Gemara says, ach. The pasuk starts with ach chilek. Ach means but, or however, but ach is a contraction. It's coming to contract on something, or detract. So before, I'll tell you part of the day. Rashi explains this further, for those who are interested. Why in the world is ach to be taken to connote here, to imply here, that half of the day you're allowed to own chametz and eat chametz. The other half, from midday and on, becomes. But Rashi says, interestingly, there's different ways of playing with numerical values in Hebrew, or playing with the messages of the Hebrew letters. One of them is the actual numerical value. That's called the classic, regular gimtaria, that we understand. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, so on and so forth. Okay? There's another few different methodologies where the letters become interchangeable. Okay? One is atbash, everybody knows that. Aleph and taf, first and last, become interchangeable. Bet and shin, so on and so forth. Okay? There's another one that Rashi brings here. It's called ahas bata. What is this? This is dividing the Hebrew alphabet into 3. And then Aleph, Het, and Samech become interchangeable. Bet, Tet, and Ayin, so on and so forth. If you do it that way, you know what you're going to get. The word Ach gets interchanged with Het, Tzadi. What is Het, Tzadi? Het, Chatzi, half. So half of the day, is the obligation to eat chametz kicks in. There's a lot more depth to this, obviously. This is a very basic pshat, the way Rashi wants to learn. Okay, so again, this is what happened. You ready, guys? We're trying to establish different methodologies, different proofs, how we know what the source in the Torah, where the biblical obligation to stop eating chametz and to destroy all that minat Torah starts at exactly in the midday point on Erev Pesach. So far we're saying that it's the fact that it says Ach Bayom Harishon on the first day destroy chametz. It couldn't mean the first day of Chag, it's already forbidden. It has to be Erev Pesach before, and the word Ach tells you when on that day, midday. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. Next, okay, Deve Rabbi Yishmael Tana. Rabbi Yishmael's means household, but I think Ashkol says means an academy. His house of learning had a different proof to this to the source, much simpler. It says Matzinu Yod Dalet Shenikar Rishon. Says Rabbi Yishmael's students, you're getting too complicated, my friends. With this psukim contradiction, no. Guess what? Torah says Ach Bayom Rishon. Guess what Rishon means? Rishon doesn't mean the first. It means the previous. How do we know? Sheneemar, as the pasuk says, Barishon, Ba'arba Yom LaChodesh. Right? It says Barishon, on the first day, in the evening in matzot. And guess what? If it says on the first day in the evening, what does that mean to say? Means that the evening following the first day must mean Erev Pesach. Very simple. Okay? Yitzchak Amer, he says that the word Rishon, okay, I misspoke here. Rabbi Shmuel's understanding is that the word Rishon is a reference, biblically, in this case, to the 14th of Nisan, based on this pasuk. Okay, the next, Nachman Yitzchak says something more interesting. Rishon, the me'ikara mashmeh. He says the word Rishon could be very well taken in biblical terms to mean the previous day, not the first day. How do we know? The Amar Kera, because one of the rebukes, one of the very strong words of rebuke to Hashem spoke to Eov. Again, Eov, we know the story of Eov. Eov, when he was challenged in very, very strong ways, very overwhelming ways, and he finally lost it, and he started to say things that were heretical, unfortunately. Hashem put him in his place. Okay, so one of the things Hashem told him to explain to him why he has no right to complain, because he doesn't really understand, he doesn't really see the full picture of what the world is like, where he's coming from, what the purpose of his suffering is. Hashem said to him, Harishon Adam Tivaled, were you created before all of humanity to know what humanity is all about? Right? In other words, meaning basically, if you existed before all of humanity came into the picture, Hashem did. Hashem laid out a whole tapestry, laid out a whole map, so to speak, right? And he mapped human chronology from the beginning of the first generation to the end of the universe. Hashem knows within the tapestry what happens here, what happens there. Now this is a reference to Gilgulim. Some people say this neshama came back because of the other person, the whole thing, right? You have no clue, Eov. So what are you complaining about, right? But guess what? What does Harishon Adam Tivalet translate into? Were you created, not first of all men, before all men. So you see the word Harishon means the previous one. So therefore, if the previous day of Chag means the day before, which is Erev Pesach. Very simple. Okay, fine. Now, the Gemara says, wait a second. You think it really could mean the word Rishon to mean that? Don't you know, from Ma'ata, if that's the case, the Torah expresses the obligation to do the mitzvah of the 4 species you have to take and shake them on the first day of Chag. Biblically, Ma'ata is the first day of Chag only. But it's the Bayom Rishon. Hachename Rishon the Meikara. You're going to tell me that the also means you have to shake the Lavan and Trog not on the 15th, not on the first day of Sukkot, rather on Erev Sukkot. We know it doesn't mean that. Sha'ane Hatam. That's different. You know why it's different? Dichtiv usmachtem lifna Hashem Elokechem shivat yamim. There, the pasuk says the following: on the first day, grab these 4 species for the mitzvah of lulav, usmachtem, and rejoice before Hashem your God 7 days. Mas Shevi'i. That pasuk is talking in one context, in one swoop, about all these different days, 1st and 7th. So there we know Shevi'i lechag. Then we know the 7th means 7th day within the Chag. Afrishon, in the context of the pasuk, it's evident intrinsically that the first, in that case, in the context of Sukkot, in that context, it means the first day of Chag. So that's not a refutation. That's not a problem. Really? By Pesach also same thing. Ketiv. He also says on the first day destroy chametz, and 7 days eat matzot. So same thing. We know here also if 7 means 7th day of Chag, Rishon also must mean Rishon lechag, first day of Chag. So you just destroyed your own learning, right? The Gemara says if that's so, imken nichtov Rishon. It should have said Rishon, Harishon. Now what does it say Harishon? It could have said in Hebrew. You could have said on first day and last day. Why did it say Bayom Harishon on the first day? You know why? Harishon, Shema Mina, Lichtam Aran is hinting to you something else is happening. It is that special day. It is that very first day, which means day before. Okay? Ihache. The Gemara says, no, we're not happy with that. If that's so, by Sukkot also is Harishon. Guess what? By Sukkot also is Harishon. Don't try to make a big deal out of the word hey, Harishon, that it means the day before. You're going to get stuck with Sukkot again. Vetu, another issue, Hatam Dichtiv, what there it says, Bayam Harishon, Shabbaton, Bayam Shemini Shabbaton, Emar Rishon Meikara. By Sukkot it also says, on the first day, Shabbaton, you have to not work, Shabbaton, Chag. On the Shemini, on the 8th day of Shemini, it says also Shabbaton, also you can't work. You're going to say because it says Hashemini and Harishon, it means you also can't work on Erev Sukkot. We know it's not true. Right? Okay, Shana Hatam. Again, the one that's different. The Amar Kera, Ubayom Hashemini Shabbaton. It says over there, Ubayom Hashemini, and on the 8th day is Shabbaton. Ma Shemini Lachag, Afrishon, Rishon Lachag. So there it says, it's obvious that Shemini must mean Shemini of the Chag. Because no other way to count Shemini. If Shemini is the 8th day of Chag, so Harishon in the same pasuk must mean also, as far as Melacha goes, as far as not doing work, it means the first day of Chag and the 8th day of Chag. Harishon Lamali. So then, why did it say Harishon? You know why? Again, we're trying to go back and say, it must be to tell you that it has to do with the Erev Chag. The Gemara says no. Limuteh hulo shel moed. The Gemara says no. That's not a problem. There, you have to say Harishon to tell you the first day and the 8th day, so you understand there's no prohibition to work Chol HaMoed, the intermediate days. Okay? The Gemara says that's not necessary. Chulo shel moed merishon u'shmini nafka. You don't need psukim. It says don't work on the first day, don't work on the 8th day. It's obvious. The days in the week you work. You don't need a special pasuk for that. Isterich. You do need it. I would have said the following conclusion: because it says Ubayom Hashemini, the vav is redundant. You know what the vav is doing? Vav mosif al inyan rishon da'afilu becholo shel moed. Maybe the vav is coming to tell you again. This is a mistaken perception I would have had because it says Ubayom Hashemini. What is it coming to add? That even chol hamoed, although it's not mentioned, you can't work. Kamashmal, and that's why it says. Ubayom Hashemini, tell you no, only first day and last day. So the idea again so far is to say that when it comes to Sukkot, the fact that it says Harishon and Hashemini, the Hey, is not a problem. It's for Chol HaMoed. When it comes to Pesach, on the other hand, the Hey, Harishon, is redundant, must be coming to tell you about Erev Pesach, you have to burn the Chametz. You must wait. There's still complications. Velo lichtov rahamana, lo vav, velo he. Why are you getting complicated? Guess what? If your objective is when it comes to Sukkot, to say you can't do work on the first day and the last day, don't get fancy. Say don't work on the first day and last day. Rishon and Shemini, no fancy diukim, no fancy inferences, no, you're right. And then we know first day is Asur, last day is Asur, and the assumption is that in the middle days you can work. Finished. So the whole fact that it says Harishon and Hashmini, again, is going to get you in trouble. Vetu, and even more, Hatam dichtiv, bayom harishon, michodesh yelachem, rishon demeikara mashma. And guess what? When it comes to Sukkot being a chag, again it says bayom harishon, mikra kodesh chag. Why can't you say it means by Pesach? It says Pesach, first day is mikra kodesh is a chag, last is a chag. If rishon in the context of Pesach means the day before, guess what? You just turn Erev Pesach into a chag. You know it's not true. Ela, the Gemara says I have a way out of this. Gemara says, you know what? Let's make it simple. Whenever it says Rishon, I have a way of explaining it out. It's not a problem. It means something else entirely. The Harishon of Pesach, leave it for our purpose. When it says Rishon, all the other cases, I'll do something else with them. So they're not going to bother you. What am I going to do with them? You know what it is? It's not the very Bishmael. The Tana de Bishmael, a whole different learning. Beschar shelosha rishon, zachu lishlosha rishon. Okay? Says Rabbi Ishmael, the fact that it says Rishon is actually a reference to something else entirely. The Torah is hinting that these three chagim, these three mitzvot, are tremendous power in terms of protection and elevation of Am Yisrael. And because we have these three observances, guess what? They have rewarded us with three unbelievable protections. Number one, we get the La'achrit Zaro Shel Amalek. Okay, number one, Shishel Esav. Number the first Rishon is a guarantee that one day we're going to be able to destroy the seed of Esav, which is Amalek, which is our bloodthirsty adversary. Number one, okay. Le'Binyam Bet HaMikdash. Number two, the second Rishon is going to guarantee us the rebuilding of the Bet HaMikdash. Okay. V'Lishmo Shel Mashiach. And the third Rishon is a guarantee we're going to one day be able to know the name of Mashiach, which means we're going to greet Mashiach. Now, which pasuk has to do with Esav? Dichtiv, V'Yitzar Rishon Admoni Kulu Kad Esav. Esav is referred to as what? Harishon, the first child. So that Rishon, his power, his energy, his negativity, his tum'ah, is countered and destroyed by the Rishon that we observe one of the Chagim. Okay. Secondly, Ulbenyam Bet HaMikdash, Dichtiv, Bet HaMikdash is referred to Kiseh Kavod, Marom, Merishon, Mekom Miktashenu. Hashem's throne of glory, right? Sits in the highest place in the universe, right? And yet, it's considered the first place that has become the place of the Bet HaMikdash. That's how it manifests itself on planet Earth in this world. So the word Rishon is used. That's also a reward for one of the Chagim that we observe with the word Rishon. The Rishon Shel Mashiach, Dichtiv, Mashiach has the word Mashiach, the word Rishon connected to him. As the pasuk says, Rishon Letzion Hina. Mashiach is called the Rishon Letzion, the first of the Zion. Here he comes. So again, when it says Rishon, don't let it bother you. Whenever it says the word Rishon, that's talking about these three Zechuyot that we've been rewarded. It says Harishon, you can make the inferences. Thereby, at the end of the day, you reserve the Harishon Pesach to tell you the day before, which is Erev Pesach, as far as eating chametz goes. Okay? Rava Amer. Rava says a whole new explanation. You don't need all this fancy stuff. I'll give you another proof, another source for why chametz becomes forbidden Passover Eve at noon. You know what it is? Me'acha, from here. Lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi. The Torah says a very interesting commandment. Let's translate. Don't slaughter over chametz dam zivchi, the blood of my zevach, of my sacrifice. What does it mean to say? Lo tishchat ha-pesach. It means do not be slaughtering the Passover, the Paschal sacrifice. Va'adain chametz kayam, while the chametz is still around. In other words, those two things are contradictory. They're mutually exclusive. If you want to get to a point where you can slaughter the Korban Pesach, you have to have rid yourself of chametz. Okay, right? When one ends, the other one begins. Okay, so that's very nice. But guess what? Ve'ema, that could be taken to mean kol hadahad ki shahid. Fine. So each person could mean the pasuk to mean each person when they stand in line outside the Beit Hamikdash to be slaughtering and processing the Korban Pesach before I bring my personal family's Passover sacrifice, could be at 5 in the afternoon. By then I get on my chametz. Who tells you that means midday? Right? Each person, before you bring your Korban Pesach, rid of your own chametz. How do you see the fact that it's midday? The Gemara answers. The answer is Zaman Shahita Amarahamana. Rashi explains it does not make sense for this to be a commandment that's subjective based on you. No, there's a universal commandment to bring Korban Pesach. There's a universal commandment to get rid of chametz. So when the Zman, when the time for Shechitat Korban Pesach kicks in, which is midday, by that point, all Jews have to rid themselves of the chametz in the reshut, in the domain. That's how we know that it begins at midday. Okay, next person, similar concept. Okay, similar concept. Tanya Ramachin, Borata says the exact same concept actually. Bayom Harishon, Tashbu Sor about on the first day, destroy Seor from your homes. How do we know whether it means on Erev Passover Eve, Erev Yom Tov, on Yom Tov by itself, Talmud Lomar, Torah comes to teach you, לא תשחט חמץ לעם זבחי, תשחט פסח ועדיין חמץ קיים. דברי רבי ישמעאל. Rabbi Ishmael says clearly, the hint for this is the Torah is hinting you that when the time for chametz, for shchitat chametz, and processing the Pesach kicks in, by that point, chametz has to be out of your domain. Rabbi Akiva Omer, he has a slightly different twist here. Eno tzarich. So you don't need this. This is obvious. Haro Omer, ach bayom harishon, tashbis or mibatechem. The Rabbi doesn't understand. Does the Torah not tell you on the first day, destroy seor from your homes? Uchtiv. And the Torah also tells you, Kol melacha lo ta'asu. You cannot do melacha on the Chag, on the first day of Chag. It's prohibited. Now, umatzinu lav ara shi'ab melacha. And how do you destroy the chametz? By burning it. Burning is one of the avot melachot. Burning is one of the 39 melachot that you cannot do on Shabbat or Chag. Yes, you can use fire, you can cook, only for the sake of things you need to eat, ochel nefesh. But for other purposes, you cannot burn, you can't drive, you can't burn, blah, blah, blah. And therefore, if the Torah is telling you to destroy chametz by burning it, it could not mean the first day of Chag. It must mean Erev Chag. Okay? Rabbi Yosef Omer, it says a different twist a little bit. Haro Omer, ach v'yam harishon, tashbu seor mibatechem, me'erev yom tov o eno lam yom tov. He says the question the Torah is dealing with, does it mean at night, or during the day? Talmud lomar, ach. The Torah says ach. There is a midday going on here. Chilek. Ve'beyom tov atzmo, mishare. It could mean yom tov atzmo, because you could not be allowed to burn the chametz halfway through that day. We had this concept before, that these three things go hand in hand. The prohibition of eating chametz, the destruction of chametz, and the mitzvah of eating matzah go hand in hand together. And therefore what? Therefore, if we understand that the Torah says the matzah applies to the whole day, therefore he cannot own chametz the whole day. So first he could not own chametz the entire day. The word ach, which is half a day, could not apply to the first day, must mean the day before. We're going to stop here. It continues a little bit, but we got the basics just so we don't know. I went fast. Again, the time is limited. If you want to revise this format, literally